A lot to discuss, of course. Our starting point is on the just ended story that regards the ruling Jubilee Party. Of course, there have been concerns that Kenyans harbored ever since, of course, the opening up of the democratic space in the country with the repeal of Section 2A of the Constitution, which, of course, paved the way and opened the floodgates for more political parties and players to grow in the country and to come up. But there has been concern on the other end of them falling short of the expected results and outcome in regard to playing the needed political establishment role. And it's that uncertain point that the ruling Jubilee Party faces, with fears that the party might disintegrate before 2022. Before I engage my able panel, let's now take a look at the cartoon edition of the Star newspaper and what lies ahead for the Deputy President William Ruto. You can take a look at this, and the interpretation is that he is now operating, or the operation is from the Jubilee Party headquarters in Pangani. Then he has to overcome all the hurdles on his way that you can see as captured by the cartoon to make it to the House on the Hill, which is State House here in Nairobi County, which is, of course, a possibly illustration and interpretation of the fierce opposition on his way and the long political winding route that regards the DP William Ruto's ambition or presidential quest in 2022. So we start on that point and equally seek the sentiments of our able panel here who are on set with regards to mass testing that the government is planning, with COVID-19 taking a toll here in the country in regard to now the number standing at 281, and whether that will pave way or will open floodgates for more cases to be confirmed in the country. And later we'll finish up on the economy, which is, of course, a concern for many Kenyans, and we are likely going to be having an interview on Skype in regard to the economic aspect with regards to the African continent. Wakili, good morning. I appreciate your time. Asante sana. Thanks for coming. And always a pleasure to have you. Daktari Justice Juma is the leader, Justice and Freedom Party in the country. Today, of course, in the red shirt, he says he is working from home.
Oh, yes.
He has his face mask on and as cautious as, of course, adhering to the guidelines provided by the Minister of Health. Good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate your time. Asante sana.
Good morning.
Asante. Wakili, of course, you also commentate and double up as governance and leadership, of course, commentator on affairs transpiring in the country. Before we come to the foreign affairs issue, a policy that appears to be wanting in the country, the mass testing that the government is planning to roll out, there is this important element about the aspect of inculcating the culture of ideology and policies, or injecting that into a political system, which has not been forthcoming since 1992. When you look at the affairs at the moment transpiring in the ruling Jubilee Party, is it set for the dustbin of political history in Kenya?
It is, definitely, because I remember the last time I was here, we talked about the origin of the Jubilee Party and how it was engineered. And the fact that the leadership crisis within the party has gotten to the peak means that we are likely to see the party itself crumble. Because this is the thing that we must remember. The Jubilee Party was not really founded on ideology. It was founded on political convenience. Those that came up with the party wanted a convenient political vehicle to carry them into office. So that is what we must remember. That the convenient circumstances then have dissipated, and now we are looking at a scenario where people are charting their own course. So we are likely to see the party splinter and people finding other vehicles, political vehicles into office.
Okay, Dr. Juma,
Yes,
is it more or less, of course, you sit on the periphery in terms of your modus operandi, in terms of your political, of course, approach to issues affecting many Kenyans.
Right.
When you look at what's happening in the opposition NASA coalition, of course, according to Moses Wetangula, it's on deathbed, it's oozing political blood. Moses, the brainchild, Musalia Mudavadi, says more or less it's existing, not existing. And the ruling Jubilee Party affairs at the moment, the marriage on the rocks, is it an illustration of perhaps the rotten state of Kenya's political establishment?
Actually, it manifests the changes that we as an electorate needed to have made before where our electoral process is concerned. Because most of the political outfits have really never been founded on the premise of specific philosophies or ideologies. Because ideologies and philosophies, they never die. Some are informed by your own identity, some are informed by your own originality, some are informed by economic growth, and then you are relevant within the human geography. And in Kenya, our political formation has always been driven, sometimes I call it those who think with the stomach, not the head.
Democracy.
What we simply call democracy. And that convenience make them rally together, all manner of characters. We've seen characters who are being elected, and more so when the rubber meets the road, when we now need them to perform and deliver. You've seen the frustration. Even this is Nairobi County. You've seen the frustration Nairobi County has gone through to an extent that certain responsibility had to be handed over back to national government in open abuse to the devolution legislations which everybody aspired and desired and had longed for. And again, on matters of alliances, the Jubilee alliances, there are no constitutional guidelines for alliances. But within the Political Parties Act, there are regulations for a party constitution. And when you are registering a political party, yes, the Registrar of Political Party regulates.
Which is the regulator?
Compliance of political parties.
All right.
And within a political party bylaws or constitution, which actually is ratified and approved by the Registrar of Political Party, there are functions and roles of every office bearer. I was looking at the functions and the descriptions of functions of Jubilee officials. And they have a party leader, they have a chairman, they have a secretary general, they have organizing secretary, and those other offices. And where there's contentions is the position of the deputy party leader and the position of the party leader. And actually in their line, I saw there's detailed descriptions of the roles of the party leader. And there is only one line which states that deputy party leader shall only help party leader. So in this case, for all Jubilee members, if they are talking about being led or being members of a political party is a formation guided by the Constitution. And that Constitution actually is deposited by the Registrar of Political Parties. For her to effect any changes, she only has to refer back to what? The constitution of that political party.
And she did, of course, note with concern the fact that she said that what has transpired following the petition filed by more than 140 MPs who are allied to the DP, that the party did not conduct the, meeting in the required standard or the threshold as put by the regulator, the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties. Then why will the biggest political party in the country, adopt what appear to have been doctored minutes for the party to effect changes and not do it to the needed, required threshold and the avenues as laid out by the Constitution and the regulator?
Well, that's a fact, but I want you to isolate issues. The registrar will be bound by the officials as per the Constitution, and she will only act by the officials, those who are mandated signatories. Any other complaint, whether you are 1,000 members, can only be addressed either through dispute tribunal, PPDP, political parties dispute tribunal, failure to which it can also be referred back to High Court, and it can take other precedents. But in this case, whether you are 1,000 of you, the registrar, she is bound by the officials, which the party submitted at that hour of transaction. So if this case it is Raphael Tuju, whether 1,000 MPs or 1,000,000 members write or petition, still for a registrar to act, she will still act in line with the mandated or gazetted official.
We'll come to the aspect about the three, of course, trio approach here, because there's President Uhuru Kenyatta on one hand, Wakili, there is the DP William Ruto. At the center to balance the beam here is the ODM leader Raila Odinga. And then the ODM party has its own, of course, needs and demands that must be met, a parliamentary system of governance. However, before we come to that expansive element about the entire happenings in the ruling Jubilee Party, there is the element about the proxy sort of wars, the Cold War between the president on one hand and his deputy William Ruto. When Tuju is, of course, pushed to the wall about answering the question, because there's a growing market for explanation, he cites the president's name. When Kositani and company go to the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, they do so in the name of the DP, William Ruto. So how will the president address this Cold War sense that has been transpiring in the late 80s and early 90s between the US and the former Soviet USSR?
First, there are people in this country in the political space that have never found a fence that they could not sit on. And one of those people is unfortunately the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, because he has been a fence sitter all through. He has been a spectator in the affairs of the Jubilee Party. Because if he has neglected being at the forefront, because he's the party leader of Jubilee Party, but we have not seen, at least those of us who are watching from the outside, have not seen his active role in the management of the party. And that has contributed to the wrangles that we are seeing right now. So I think what he should do is to come out clearly, because Raphael Tuju and those that act in his camp act with the blessing of the president, Uhuru Kenyatta. So he should come out clearly and address, carry out the war. If there is a war indeed that is coming from his camp, let him spearhead that war instead of using people who are allied to him. The same with Deputy President William Ruto, because he has been acting and using the people, like the people you've mentioned, speaking on his behalf. Let them come out clear, because when they were founding the Jubilee Party, they came out clear to the nation. They told us this is the Jubilee Party, and at the initial stages,
and
they appeared.
Yes,
they appeared to be right at the helm of the party, and they were holding the reins of the party. Mm-hmm. So at this point, to counter all these accusations that are flying left, right, and center, they should both come out and square things out clearly as leaders that they claim to be.
Okay, and is the problem, Dr. John, if I may come to you then, of course, the leverage lies with the president and the DP, William Ruto, because they hold the cards here. And they don't seem to be playing the cards well in the, of course, game that is apparently internally or intra-game playing, which is ongoing in the ruling Jubilee Party. Why will they not mend the fences then? I mean, what's holding them up if this party was about ideology and politics, and that they told us in 2016, in September, when they folded up more than 10 parties, that we will rule the country until 2032, and that this is the party that will end ethnic balkanization, address the ethnocentric sense of political problem in the country, and ethno-majoritarian democracy of two communities rule in the country, and with no religious, of course, affiliation, political party belonging, distance from Nairobi, and that resources will be equally shared in the country. Why are they not recalling all those affairs that they promised Kenyans in 2016?
There's a danger of copy-pasting philosophies.
Did they?
Well, when you say nice things and you do the obvious, the alternative, that shows that that actually was never you. And it's very easy to copy-paste what is convenience, or say what you want people to hear. But you judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. And so far, I know it's a sensitive moment this hour, where as a country and other political leaders, it will not be wise to really point figures. It's a moment when people need to work collectively as one and address the pandemic that is actually ravaging the world. It has brought continents to its knees. It's a tsunami that is sinking so many countries. And the best we can do is to come together and address this thing united as one. Actually, this is the time, this thing does not know political party, neither does it know tribe. I agree whether you are rich or poor.
There's no class.
It has no class. So I think it is a bit insensitive for the Jubilee leadership to treat Kenyans to their own personal interest, which is of no significance to Kenyan whatsoever, and make it an issue at this day and age, where the CS actually is warning us about of red alert. We can actually be entering the danger zone because the infections are increasing every day. Yet mechanisms that have been placed on the ground to sort out these things are really lacking. What I would have urged the two gentlemen, and this is where leadership actually is called on. If there were real leaders who have the interests of the citizen at heart, I would have seen the deputy president working hand in hand with his party leader, the president of Kenya, who is actually the party leader of Jubilee Party. Unfortunately, they are not doing that. And to us, I think Kenyans is a very bad show of bad leadership.
Okay.
It's a show of very bad leadership, which to me should not be exhibited at this hour. This is the hour where you can actually just ignore your own personal interest. whether selfish or genuine, and unite for national good.
All right.
There are moments when we've seen them coming together and pushing so that we also inspire and give hope. As I was coming here, some people, actually they have food, but children are not going to school. And the children are so depressed. Some were to do the exams. Some are in university. And a single parent goes home and the child is not talking to you. What do you expect the child to do? The parent is also equally depressed, and she does not know how to handle the parent. So some do not necessarily need a food relief. Some just need inspiration and encouragement. But if we are exhibiting all this negative energy, when we are self-centered, we are pushing things that are of no consequence, no concern to the citizen, then I think that is a very insensitive leadership.
Which appears to be not forthcoming from the needed leadership, of course, capacity to lay out examples from the top in terms of trickling down effect to down bottom, where many Kenyans, of course, are listening to what they say, but unfortunately, it appears that it's politics as usual. Coming to you, Wakili, there is this important element about the concerns that have been raised by the allies of the DP, William Ruto, who appear to be having a form of a predator approach on Raila Odinga. And to just quote in his book, page 673, The Flame of Freedom, in his autobiography, the former Prime Minister says, I quote him, that, of course, he was talking about the merger between NDP and KANU between 1998 and 2002. And I quote him, he says, they were not aware that I rarely do anything without being thoroughly convinced of my plans ahead of time. He continues, the plan was to continue my battle against KANU from within and Moi, and to make NDP-KANU merger Moi's Waterloo. He continues on page 670, and to break KANU from within. These are the same statements that the likes of Moses Kuria, Kimani Ichung'wah, Ndindi Nyoro, Jane Kihara, and Alice Wahome, and Caleb Kositany have been saying that, Mr. President, watch out, that Raila Odinga might break our party from within. They have rang the bell, they continue ringing the bell, and is there some validity in their claims?
If you look at the life of the political life of the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, you can trace his modus operandi. If his intentions or if his goals are not being met in a certain environment, he creates a new environment for himself. And going by those declarations from himself, it is clear that that is something that is bound to happen. And the Deputy President at one point mentioned this. I think it must have been on live TV somewhere. He mentioned it, that he knows that Raila Odinga will break up Jubilee Party. It didn't take very long. We are already seeing splinters within the Jubilee Party. But these are political intrigues that we have become accustomed to. We have become accustomed to political betrayal. We have become accustomed to political cheating, if I may use that word loosely. So these machinations that we have become accustomed, they're part of our political space. And so I will not be surprised if at the end of the life of the Jubilee Party, it will be attributed to the former Prime Minister and his think tank.
Okay, Dr. Juma, a concern, does it qualify?
You see, in politics, or when you are playing a game, and you already predicted your opponent's strategy, isn't that a plus for you as an opponent? And where we are in the political sphere, there's no day you will expect other players to be passively there, waiting for you to score, to have political score on their behalf. Sorry for this. And without proper retaliation.
Okay.
If you are aware that his intention is to break down Jubilee Party, and what are you doing about it?
Then who needs to be concerned more?
Are you sitting back to help him break it?
One side is raising the red flag,
yes,
but on the other end, that signal is not well received, which is the president, and he seems to be ignoring that call.
Well, the coming together of President Uhuru Kenyatta and a party leader of ODM party, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, came together. Of course, a number of us questioned, but that was the voice. And I think if you're interviewing us then, you had us calling for national dialogue, because the fragmentation that occurred after the last election, they campaigned in some very dirty tribal ideologies, and they actually divided Kenyans. Kenyans actually was ripe for self-destruction, and the economy was affected widely. And the image actually was not the image you would long to, you would desire to have as a citizen. And the majority of us called for national dialogue so that we also have solutions to these perennial things that keep on coming, and electoral reforms that some of us were proposing.
Okay.
And this mandated the coming together, even though they did not do it according to how they were being advised. They went, just the two gentlemen came up with their own concept, and give or take, the handshake had its own some benefits in cooling the tempo and creating a good economic environment for Kenyans to go back to business, unlike the perennial mandate tear gas of ODM and with the government previously. If this had not worked, I think the country would be in a worse state. But that being the case, how have they managed it? Because to me, right now, what should be speaking for Jubilee government is their scorecard. How are they performing on their scorecard? These people who are making noise, like the members of parliament. Right now, a number of businesses have been closed by the government declaration. What policies are they putting in place? What legislation are they putting in place to mitigate and even cushion Kenyans? Here we are still crying about rent. People actually are so depressed about issues that can be relieved. So instead of helping Kenyans whom they were to serve, they are busy crying like babies and crying about interest that does not concern Kenyans. To me, I think fellow Kenyans, those such representatives actually are treating us to a raw deal and should not be given audience if possible.
Asante sana, Dr. Juma.
Just one last thing I should say on Jubilee Party. People think that the president cares about the life of Jubilee Party. He does not. He's not interested in the life of Jubilee Party after 2022.
All right. And of course, Dr. Juma, he did talk about or mentioned the aspect about the scorecard.
Right.
But the problem is they're offering two separate scorecards,
yes,
which appears to be denting their image even further. And what at some point the former UK Prime Minister David Cameron, who is a victim of the Brexit in 2016 referendum, said during the coalition government with Nick Clegg that we are married, not to each other. This is a government, not a relationship.
Yes.
I think that is the bit that is remaining to break it down from the plural we in 2013 to singular I of President Uhuru Kenyatta and the DP William Ruto.
True.
When we come back from the break here on the broadcast, we turn our attention to the state and the welfare of Kenyans in Guangzhou in China, with cases of course, racial discrimination against Africans by extension, and the concern that Kenyans and Africans have. The governments take the impracticability of the statement made by the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is Ambassador Macharia Kamau, and we'll be taking stock of that even as we discuss the on the other end perspective of whether the Kenyan foreign policy need restructuring, re-engineering, so that Kenya can play the needed diplomatic role across the globe. The number is 0791-478-990, the hashtag on Twitter, NewDayKE, the short SMS code 40920. Stay tuned, we are coming back after the break in the afternoon, that's from 12 p.m. Thanks. The broadcast, thank you for staying with us. The number is 0791-478-990, the hashtag on Twitter, NewDayKE, the short SMS code is 40920. We appreciate and thank you for staying with us here on the broadcast as we continue with the topical issues at hand and that are of concern to you, the Kenyan at home, as we bring unto you the important element that regard policy and other issues in the country in regard to what needs to be corrected by the government and undo the damage that is often done to Kenyans. Dr. Juma, thank you for staying with us, and so is Wakili Philip. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Now let's not turn our attention to another important development, which is in regard to the welfare of Kenyans in the city of Guangzhou in China. And of course, in regard to Ambassador Macharia Kamau's statement when he appeared before the Parliamentary Committee. And let's take a look at the highlight as captured by the front page of the Daily Nation this Tuesday morning in regard to Kenyans in China. If we can have that up on air. When your country abandons you, the depths of desperation, Kenyans now seeking help from well-wishers for them to touch down here in the country so that they can be safe from the racial discrimination they have been subjected to by locals in China after accusations that foreigners were re-importing the virus into China following the flattening of the curve in the city of Wuhan in Hubei province. If I may come to you, Wakili, when you hear we will come and unpack the aspect about, of course, and the meaning and what needs to be understood by Kenyans in regard to the underlying theme of Ndege Si Matatu. Because I've spent billions, I mean millions of shillings on the shuttle diplomacy for Kenyans to be freed from the grip of the ICC then by the former Vice President Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, who toured across the African continent. President Uhuru Kenyatta is, of course, touring how many trips he made, and, of course, the more than 400 million shillings spent in the quest for Ambassador Amina Mohamed to clinch the African Union AU Commission post, which is currently occupied by Musa Faki Mahamat, who is the head of the commission. But when you hear the principal secretary say that Matatu, Ndege Sio Matatu, is it a case, Ndege Sio Matatu, is it a case of the government abandoning its people?
You know, this government especially has had a condescending attitude towards its citizens. When you hear such a high-profile government official take that approach, I mean, he's communicating the government's approach, and he's saying, you do not know what you're saying. You do not know what you're saying by telling us to evacuate our own citizens from China. That is a condescending attitude that should not be tolerated. This is the other thing, and you know this. I respect his credentials, the PS's credentials.
Of course,
he's a man,
diplomat,
yes.
career diplomat.
I had his statements. Aside from being eloquent in delivery of his speech, there was nothing more that you could hold on to, that an ordinary Kenyan could hold on to. What is happening in China right now? You've mentioned racism. I think we'll come to that later, I hope. But what is happening in China is unfortunate, because if a government cannot take care of its citizens at home and abroad, then that government is failing on its mandate. What we have seen the government doing and saying is that those that went abroad, those that are in China, went on their own volition, and so it is up to them to take care of themselves. That is not a government that is responsible. That is not a government that has the interests of its citizens at heart. And it is unfortunate that we have not seen, and I will keep mentioning this, we have not seen the president mentioning this. In the mechanical speeches that he has been delivering since we started handling this pandemic, he has not touched on it. It's as though it does not bother him that we have Kenyans who are suffering in China.
Okay.
It doesn't bother him.
All right. The racism aspect is also another expansion. But Dr. Juma, if I may come to you, this is what the ambassador said first when he addressed the media at the headquarters of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, that I quote him, "We have a minority that are affected in China, but we have to worry about that minority because they are Kenyans." He appeared before a parliamentary committee hours later, and the tone was totally different. What do you think is the missing link between what affairs transpired between the Minister of Foreign Affairs headquarters and when he appeared before the parliamentary committee?
Well, let me tie that with Ndege Sio Matatu. I asked Ndege gani, kwa sababu here in Kenya, we've only have KQ, which we've been bailing out year in, year out, because by citizens, national coffers, I mean our taxes. We give them our own money. The other time we bailed them 20 billion. They had a deni of 24 billion, which were written off. Again, we bailed them 5 billion. Same KQ. The least KQ could do is to just bail out Rudisha Mkono and asaidia wa Kenya in Swahili. It's very easy. And if you're telling us that is a Ndege which is not Matatu, yes, we are the ones who have been bailing this Ndege out, then seriously, are you abusing us or what? Because this was the right time also for KQ to give back. If you hear some people are stranded and you have the ability, fuel has gone down. Actually, it is
per barrel is about now
below $1.
Below $1.
Now, with the fuel below $1, such what else do they need to get those guys to Kenya? So, to me, I think they've been lacking they've been lacking, I don't know how to put it, whether it is our leaders are kind of like have a specific inferiority complex. When we saw the xenophobic behavior within African country, it was of a challenge. Actually, several countries took measures, and that one I was worried. But here is a case where a specific country is targeting a specific racial group. Chinese are targeting blacks. Whether you are Kenyan, whether you are a Nigerian, wherever you are, we are targeted out there.
Okay.
And these are our brothers in a foreign land who have no option or nowhere else to turn to. I remember the story of the lady who went to the embassy and turned away, being told that we will take you back at your own cost. This own cost ni pesa ya nani?
Okay.
The tax we pay is citizen money.
Okay, it's very important, Dr. Juma, because we need a good explanation in regards to that, because we have to get the mathematics here, because Kenyan diaspora community, more than 3 million as projected by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. In 2019, they remitted nearly 300 billion Kenya shillings to Kenya, amounting to 2.9% of the country's GDP growth.
That's a very significant
constituency. Okay, when the government say there's no money to take you back home, where is the money they have been sending back home?
Those are the questions. So you see, when you look at the government approach, especially our foreign policy, for once we've not been having offensive foreign policies. We've been reactive to those who have their own plans. If you go to Chinese, you hear they have 50 years plan for Africa. If you go to Europe, they are having, you remember Berlin Council, isn't it? They're all having plans and goals for Africa. Yet we have leaders who, for once, even when opportunity presents itself, because this is one moment when all the economies are at the floor. And this moment, actually, if you are doing a race, or sprinting race, and all of you are on your knees, on your mark, this is the moment when we are almost at the same mode.
At the same
and
line.
the decisions we make right now will determine whether we win the race or we are defeated. And you see people perennially making decisions which are actually taking us back to where we need to come out of. I expected an African leadership which can put down their feet forward and say, for once, Africans should not be disrespected.
Okay.
And if you disrespect an African, I know this year hata kama utanishika leo, let me say this. If they are beating our people, then why should we not beat the 10 million who are residing in Africa?
But it's very unfortunate, isn't it, to make, and that is your own statement, Dr.
Yes.
to just be fair.
Right.
Neither is that the opinion of the network that is broadcasting this or mine. But isn't it that unfortunate too that you can't, an eye for an eye,
well,
either is not the problem?
Is that there comes a time, they have over 10 million citizens within Africa. They have investments in Africa. Their government should have foreseen the consequences, but they know that they probably, maybe their thinking will be laid back. So sometimes we need to show them that if you touch our own, we will also touch yours.
Why not then, instead of course, the approach that you want us to adopt, why not then make our foreign policy broad-based, robust, and one that, of course, has sort of maximum respect needed across the international arena, because that's what's lacking.
No,
the lack
this
of comprehensive
actually has been failed by leaders who have been using us as charity case. The moments when instead of interacting with these other nations as co-partners in trade and addressing global issues, they've always taken kickbacks and they've always sacrificed their countries. And these people always think in the back of their mind that they can always manipulate us and use us through our leaders. And we are calling our leaders to rise up to the occasion.
All right.
We cannot be used and abused like that.
Okay, well, Wakili, let me come to you briefly, because we have important soundbite here from a Kenyan student in China who, of course, spoke to us on the situation there, and this is what they had to say.
The situation here is just worsening day after the other. You find even after quarantine, they will come and lock you down again in your own house. Not about locking the gate, locking the door. You cannot come out of the door. The government of China, they have started testing us blood. So according to the scripts they gave to us, the test is through saliva. And now they have upgraded that they have to take blood from us. I have right now like 5 to 10 people who have been put in the hospital. because they denied to test blood. They know that the test should be the saliva, and because they said they know their friends and everybody has been testing for either saliva or from the nose, why their case will be for blood. We are your children, we are your people. I'm pleading on behalf of all Africans and on behalf of my fellow friends and brothers who are here. We are mothers, we are fathers here. Where are you going to take our kids when we die here? They'll be orphans. You can't give them anything. It's so painful.
That's a Kenyan student who, of course, spoke to us in regard to the situation there, and you can, of course, understand the situation in regard to what's facing Africans and, by extension, Kenyans in China. Wakili, you had a thought? Yes, please go ahead.
I wanted to weigh in on what Justice had just mentioned. You see, our foreign policy is solid in other matters, but when it comes to our relationship with China, especially, the foreign policy shifts to subservience. We are subservient to China. We cannot do anything that appears to conflict the government of China or China's policy on Africa. That is very unfortunate for us, not just as a country, but as a continent. The fact that we cannot act in any way that contravenes the government of China and the policies they have set up means that our hands are tied. We are slaves to China. That is basically it. We are slaves to China. If we cannot engage with the Chinese government and ensure that our people who are in such situations have been evacuated from China, then it means we have no business calling ourselves sovereign. And this is the other bit that is saddening, that the government is out of touch with its citizens. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you listen to that student, and she's just a specimen of others that are going through the same, if not worse, circumstances, that is a plight that cannot be neglected. But the government is neglecting this. When PS Macharia is talking about ndege kutokuwa matatu. Mm-hmm. I mean, we understand that it is a logistical nightmare to shift people from different provinces in China. But you cannot just stop at saying it is a logistical nightmare. So let us leave it at that. There is no attempt, there is no effort to make sure that Kenyans there are protected. The first issue is that we have Kenyans who are exposed to the virus. That we should have tackled in the first instance. The second issue is the issue of discrimination that we are seeing. And it's not just discrimination on grounds of social class. Mm-hmm. It is racial discrimination against Africans. This is something that the African continent, the African Union, and it's unfortunate that the African Union died a long time ago. It is unfortunate that the African Union has not come out strongly to speak against Afrophobia that is currently going on in China. Okay. The International Convention on the Elimination of all Forms of Racial Discrimination is very clear that nations, countries that ascribe to that convention, are signatories to that convention, should make sure that no acts of racial discrimination should go on their soils. And this is not happening. And the fact that African countries are not coming out to speak with a clear voice against such acts is very unfortunate. And we should not just be looking at the acts of discrimination, of racial discrimination. We should look at the ideology behind this, this behavior. Mm-hmm. Because if the ideology behind it is that these people are considering themselves superior, then we have a big problem. We'll have a big problem with their engagement on the continent. It will not just stop in the Chinese cities. It will flow over into this continent.
Well, Dr. Juma, let's finish up on the Kenyan context and then go to China and perhaps understand or make sense of what's funny and fueling the racial discrimination reports in China. Of course, it's not only targeting Africans, but equally black Americans who are American nationals and living in Guangzhou. But given that, why do you think that the government seems to be lacking the willingness to be human and lacks the comprehensive planning to take Kenyans back home?
Well, it came as a surprise to many. When you look at Kenyan passport, anyone who touches you touches Kenyan government. you are
A property of the Kenyan government.
a property of the Kenyan government. And if Kenya can neglect its own property and tell the property, no, you know, I'll sort you out at your own cost. When the property actually is direly in need, then it poses questions that we are raising now. And the simplest challenge to the government is reconsider that. Bring home those Kenyans. Let's sort out those bills when they are here. We've been sorted. You've borrowed a lot, and we are the ones who are paying, including from China. And for China, I think this can be handled twofold. It's an opportunity for you. You can use it as a leverage to negotiate with China on the leverages China had over us. Because right now, still the discussion of the source of the flu, the virus is still, of course, disputed. Whether we know it broke from, it began in China, Wuhan. And
the epicenter is in China.
Of course. I saw Germany already sent a bill, whether it is a fake news or not, to China. And I also saw, I think it was Trump, who also wants to take China to international court for not handling this thing and warning the other countries as well. So there are various elements to how this thing can be handled by the government. But meanwhile, give your citizens first priority. Address their needs. Be in sync with their needs. And more so when there is abuse. When there is abuse and somebody's life is endangered, I think all of us, that endangers all our lives.
Okay.
And that calls, because I assume that was me in China, and any of us can be in China now.
Yes.
They will be going through the same.
All right.
And if the government cannot protect us at that context, I think it is alarming. The government needs to act.
Okay. Right. Now, Wakil, if I may come to you, then there is, of course, the flip end as to what's precipitating all what's happening in China. First, it was xenophobia against the Chinese in Italy, which is the European country with the highest number of Chinese in the European continent. And then comes this Afrophobia, which is racial discrimination against Africans. And there is the debate as to the concern the United States has always expressed that China is quietly amassing influence within the United Nations system. And the concern is that its influence, which is growing, is affecting the imbued systems that have been put in place by the United Kingdom and the United States of America in the early 1950s when the UN was formed after 1945 and the end of the World War II. Does this again open the door for superiority rivalry here, in which we are seeing unconscious discrimination from Africans, nationalism from China against Africans, nationalism on the United States, and where Trump is funding ultra-nationalism in the United States of America, and the European context is largely becoming, of course, or shutting its borders because of feeling that the immigrants are taking over with regards to what we have seen in 2016 when the UK walked out of the European Union?
That is true. You know, Africa seems to be the only continent that is blind to the geopolitical wars around the world and the geopolitical machinations that we are seeing between nations. Because if we were alive to what is happening geopolitically, then we would know that China is strategically positioning itself, especially within this continent. I insist on this continent because Africa has been a bargaining chip for countries that have sought to control certain sectors of the economy and certain areas of the geopolitical space. And a few years ago, I read a story. I don't know the veracity of the story, but the story was to the effect that China intends to settle a certain number of people. It was towards millions, a few million people in Africa by a certain period. And if you look at what they have been doing, the kind of contracts they have been engaging with the African states, the kind of donor funding that they have been giving to the African people, it is a resettlement agenda. And we must be alive to that fact. We should not just be taking handouts from the Chinese, who do not care what more to use them for. That in contrast with for example, the European states and the United States that will insist on accountability, they will insist on you accounting for what they have handed over to you. China does not care so long as their needs are met.
Neither do they have concerns about human rights,
and that is very dangerous. That is a very dangerous ally to have, because they can turn on you at any given point. And what we are seeing in China is a pointer to what we should expect in the coming few years if we retain alliance with China.
Okay, Dr. Juma, then the aspect about, of course, the other important element is what Wakili has mentioned. On an official level, there is massive infrastructure expansion in the African continent in the name of the pet projects by President Xi, who in 2018 visited 4 key African countries, Angola, Senegal, Tanzania, and another country I can't recall at the time in the African continent, and talk about the SGR in Kenya, the SGR in Ethiopia, football stadiums across the continent. And on the person-to-person level then, there is the concern that Africans have, for instance, in the western part of the continent, where ECOWAS says now that the Chinese are coming with their labor, our people are employed. That was the concern that Fred Matiang'i, the minister, had at one point when he, in impromptu visit, had to go to Nyayo House here in Nairobi County. Now, to what extent is Africa now appeared to be submerged and is not afloat on the water because of the death trap diplomacy the Chinese have employed in the African continent? Which
we needed to have been aware of. We warned then and advised in the event that we were to go in the same direction. We have negotiated projects where let them fund the money and bring technical expertise, but we do the job. Unfortunately, it's not so. They're saying that in quotes. If you go to Huawei, you'll find even sweeping the floor. Some Chinese are employed to do that. Actually, Chinese are opening hawking shops. In Luthuli, you saw the other day we were having some in Gikomba, also doing the same things that Kenyans need to do. Our leadership should have been aware by now about the styles of economic hitmen. We suffered the same fate with our Western allies. We needed to change. And also, as the global tectonic, when it is moving, we should also have understanding. We have very smart and very intelligent Africans. I'm not looking down upon Africa in any way. Actually, some of these policies are emanating from our brilliant chaps, from our own research, which some people take and execute. And when globalization is going to the deathbed, and you see the Brexit, those were all indicators that people ought to have seen. And they come with such prejudices, where every individuals want to, again now, re-exalt their own identity, their racial prejudice, but of course, a key on it are economic wars. And these economic wars, whether they are the root behind even the biological warfare we are going through, well, that one, yes, needs to be investigated and be brought to the table. But as a country, it's simple. Even as a head of state, I would know that each time America goes to election, there are always some viruses are breaking out.
Did that happen in 2012?
Well, we had Ebola, we had the swine flu, we had MERS, and all of them in the election years, my friend. So if I am the leader, there are things you can predict, but you're not just predicting. We've seen video clips of these guys talking about these things. This is why we have institutions. This is why institutions of learning. This is why we have research institutions. And we should always have some level of preparedness. But where we are, if we are again left to react, because a crisis is an opportunity for everybody. What you do with it matters. And as a country or as an African, we ought to have had a definition that is African friendly, that we can use to engage and interact with these issues whenever they come. We cannot be crying ear in, ear out, always crying at the issues that can turn around to be actually an opportunity for us.
All right. Now you have mentioned important points, because we are equally looking at this from the perspective, Wakili, of globalization. I mean, when you have xenophobia in China against Africans largely, of course Kenyans included. When you have European countries shutting border now, there are Eastern European countries and there are Western European countries, because some believe in closing down of the border, some believe in the EU, the European Union, EU, I mean, analogy in which it's about unity, and which encompasses immigration, welcoming people, having the open door policy in terms of immigration. And when you have United States of America on a nationalism end, a nationalistic year ahead in terms of its elections, Donald Trump's America First policy, to what degree of determination does Africa now need to have the intrapersonal communication and end supplies and reliance on the West and on the East, and focus on the available resources and set the African continent to the path of prosperity? Because when you look at the agriculture sector, for instance, half of the world's arable land is in the African continent.
True.
Right.
More than 400 million people are going to bed hungry at night. How do you address that?
You know, some people say there is power in a name. And when you look at the evolution of the African Union, right from Kwame Nkrumah's OAU, well, OAU was Organization of African Unity. Then the African leaders were concentrating on uniting the continent. Right now we have the African Union, and if you could loosely translate the name, then it's just, it's a union of different states, not geared towards unity. Union and unity are two very different things. So one of the things that we have neglected to do is to look inward and identify what our capacities are as a continent. Because we have, just as I said, we have amazing and amazingly brilliant people on this continent. And unfortunately, we have managed to export that capacity. We have managed to export that brilliance to other nations. There are very many Africans who are serving in other countries without the continent. If only we could harness that capacity and use it to drive our economies forward.
Okay.
The mere fact that we are having disjointed efforts in fighting coronavirus, for example, within the African continent, goes a long way to show that we are not united. We do not have one agenda.
Okay.
The other day we had Kenyans castigating Magufuli just down here because of his approach to fighting the virus. We have different approaches to fighting this pandemic. Yet we should be united as a continent in charting the way forward. We have a common history. I mean, we have everything it takes to push us forward. But we have not looked at our capacity. That is one. Two, we have invested in a lack of leadership. I know that is an oxymoron, but that is what we have managed to do. We have elected people who have no idea, people who do not have the interests of the continent at heart. If you contrast that with the caliber of leaders that we had when the African continent was just being birthed, it is a deep contrast. We do not have the leadership it takes to run the continent forward. Just the other day, President Paul Kagame was engaging in the G20 leaders meeting.
Teleconferencing.
Yes, as a special member. Have you seen the African Union have its leaders meet even virtually? We've not had that. It just goes to show that we have different agenda. We have leaders who are more concentrating on keeping their powers, their respective powers within their countries, rather than focusing on the continent itself.
Asante sana wakili. Daktari, I'll come to you, finish up on that point, and afterwards then we go to... we are going to break. We come back and finish up with that point, then cross over to the mass testing that the government is planning in regard to COVID-19 response. And as we finish up here on the broadcast, and towards the end or the tail end of the program here, we'll be getting the international update in regards to the COVID-19 cases around the world, and so far the approach by the global community in regard to the response they have outlined in the battle against the coronavirus pandemic across the world. The number is 0791 478 990. The hashtag on Twitter, NewDayKE. The short SMS code is 40920. Stay tuned. We're coming back after the break here on the broadcast. Welcome back. You're watching the broadcast. Thank you for staying with us. This is New Day Kenya. And we continue with the subject matter at hand, which is the impact of COVID-19 on globalization in regard to the continuous cases of racial discrimination cases around the world, starting off with xenophobia against the Chinese in Italy, that's in Europe, and then later against Africans in the city of Guangzhou in China, and largely across other cities in China, which is the epicenter of the global pandemic, the COVID-19. But there are concerns as to why the World Health Organization has delayed in terming the virus as a pandemic. And the United States of America now cutting the funding to the World Health Organization, saying that it's China allied, and anyway from the onset, China has of course lobbied for the appointment in becoming the Director General at the World Health Organization of the former Ethiopian Foreign Affairs Minister, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. And we will be seeking the final sentiment from Dr. Juma on the broadcast in regard to that. Now, in terms of globalization, of course, when you read the work of scholars like American Professor Samuel Huntington, who wrote an entire book about the clash of civilizations, yes, talking about the cultural, the nationality issue, the religious issue, the Western values, finding it hard to inculcate it among or instill that in, say, for instance, places like Asia, in the Middle East, and in Africa. Post-COVID-19, when the dust settles, are we likely to see a new world order emerging?
Well, the world order and its agendas have been in place. And they are cleverly crafted and executed. And they come with disasters and fear for purposes of instilling them. There were some racial commentators like us, who were directing the COVID-19 the viruses to be tested in, vaccines to be tested in Africa. And shortly, actually, was it yesterday, we are seeing pictures in DRC Congo, in Cameroon, of Kenyans who are taking jabs and being vaccinated by the same vaccine that people have been shouting against. Yet there are governments in those areas. The globalization agenda in African chapter, Africa needs an extreme departure from those norms. You mentioned total revolution from the designs of the patterns of the world, whether it is education, whether it is culture, whether it is religion, the economic infrastructure, health. You go back to governance, yes,
okay,
and economy. They are not designed for the well-being of Africa. We have to redefine.
Okay.
Alexander the Great said, you give somebody your language, that person becomes your slave forever. Because he was right. A person is a slave to the language they speak. A language has its own nuances. It has its own culture and its own custom. When you learn a language, like right now, you see this one we are speaking, you will extol and esteem its customs, its cultures. And whose culture are you exalting?
Of course, the English culture.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that is why in their colonies, they went diminishing the indigenous languages and exalting what? Or nationalizing their own cultures and their custom. And these are the things that have led us with the identity crisis, cultural crisis.
Okay.
And this, again, goes ahead to affect our national ethos, our national vision, the things we're discussing in BBI. Because their national ethos and their national visions become your vision. And then their vision is to destroy you. Then again, our few vulnerable, some might, those who are looking for coins, akipata some billions, na wekwe kwa ofisi, they can sell out the entire country and implement these policies because of their lack of foresight. And these have been the challenges that Africa is grappling with. Finding leaders, and that's where also we need a revolution in.
Okay.
Leaders whose mindset can think beyond these, the goals that have been set, and then champion a new agenda, which is African, which exalt our culture, which exalt our tradition, which redefine our vision.
All right.
Then set this. Sad enough that Kenya as a government does not have national vision.
All right.
And here we are living, Ayub. Yeah, so I think to me it's painful, yes. Sorry for cutting you, but we need an extreme, radical departure from the norms through a revolution.
A paradigm shift is what, of course, you are talking about. Wakili and Daktari, let's now shift gear and turn our attention to the planned mass testing in the country by the national government in regard to COVID-19. Before I get your sentiments, now the targeted mass testing at the Kenya Ports Authority in Mombasa County, one of the areas identified as hotspots by the government in the spread of COVID-19, enters day two yesterday, with over 100 staff tested. The farm was targeted for mass testing after 7 of its staff tested positive for COVID-19, 2 resulting in death.
So far recorded 7 positive cases and 2 deaths of COVID-19, placing the government agency as one of the COVID-19 hotspots. In a bid to ensure that the virus is contained, mass testing exercise has begun. The exercise, that is targeting at least 1,000 of its employees, was led by Acting Managing Director Rashid Salim, who noted that so far 157 people have been tested, awaiting the results.
We have sanitizers at the gates, and we're hoping to put more all over the other gates, 12, 14, 16, and 24. So we are ensuring the port fraternity, the agencies working inside, our stakeholders, that it is safe to come into the port, as all the cargo ships that are coming in are quite safe.
In the last few days, the port has implemented several of these measures, including fumigation of key equipment, operation areas, offices and workshops. Sanitization and hand washing at the gates and entrance to the buildings has also been maintained.
Fumigation in the port is done 2 times to 3 times a week. In our medical facilities, we are recommending that we do 3 times in a week. On our crafts, the marine crafts, the pilot boats, we take the pilots to the ship. We do them twice a week. And in the office areas, we do them once in a week. All our office accommodations are done on a weekly basis.
The authorities' commitment in combating the spread of the virus comes in after a section of the Kenya Ports Authority workers threatened to go on strike following fears of the spread of the virus at the agency. So far, since the start of the mass testing exercise at the port, a total of 42 employees who were tested received their results that turned out negative. Milia Kisenya for Ebru TV.
Thank you, Milia, for that update. Of course, it's in regard to the attention now which is focused on the Kenya Ports Authority. Wakili, if I may come to you, will mass testing definitely will reveal the high number of cases in the country owing to now local transmission, which is the point of concern in the country. Will that overwhelm our healthcare system?
It is bound to, because if going by statistics and what other countries have experienced, the more people you have infected and needing critical care, the more the healthcare system is stretched. So it's bound to. Before we even had this virus, it's interesting that we were talking about Africa and how Africa is responding to a lot of issues. It is surprising that while we were supposed to be looking at measures of deterrence and prevention, African countries were mark-timing, waiting to receive the virus. And going by our own example here in the country, we were boasting of our capacity to handle the disease without looking at preventing importation of the virus. But that said, mass testing should have begun a while back. It's interesting to note that it's only after demonstrations or a threat to demonstrate and downtown tools at KPA that now mass testing is being taken there. At any place where an infection has been reported, it is prudent to carry out mass testing in that area because you may not know the level of infection. If you take an example of Tanzania, for example, I mentioned it a while back. Tanzania is being castigated for taking less stringent measures in curbing the virus. But where if you look at the places Tanzania has reported infections, it's basically across the country. We have cases in Dodoma, in Ruvuma, all over.
With Dar es Salaam accounting for the lion's share.
Yes, yes. It's all over Tanzania. But those infections, the reported infections, correspond to testing facilities. So if you look at infections in Morogoro, for example, there is a lab that has been set up in Morogoro. There's a lab that has been set up in Tabora, Kigoma, and elsewhere. So their numbers could be accurate because they are testing. Our numbers could only be showing what we have managed to test and not what we should have tested at this point. So it is important, it is good that the government is now rolling out the mass testing, but it should not just be concentrated on the few areas where cases have been reported. The mass testing should even go to areas where you've not had a case. In Trans Nzoia, for example, where you've not had a reported infection, because you might not know. Somebody might have transported the virus there, and given the asymptomatic nature of this virus in some people, you might have people who are living with the virus, yet
they're not showing any signs.
Yeah, they're not showing any signs.
Okay, Dr. Juma, then, when you critically observe the mass testing element, because that has been the clarion call from the World Health Organization, test, test, test. That is what Adhanom continues to insist on when he addresses the world from Geneva and Switzerland. But with a limited laboratory capacity, how will we effect that?
In essential for health, very simple, right from the primary level, secondary level to tertiary level. You had us make a call for the president to revert to our default setting, which is have a homegrown approach to this pandemic, over and above waiting because they were defeated to stop it from coming. And our method needed to be different. There are a number of variables, especially even with Tanzania. Tanzania, about 90% of the population actually are in the rural sectors, not as Nairobi. And even the urbanization variables, you cannot compare with what. And when they choose not to lock down, it's based on what? What is suitable within exactly the realities that they have. But in Kenyan case, we have been treated to, because primarily is the community, secondary where we have isolation centers, and tertiary where we have ICUs. We've been treated by figures and data from the ICUs and the isolation centers. Okay. In isolation centers where also people are mistreated, taken care of in a very inhumane way. You've had some people are living like they're already condemned to die with corona based on how they're being handled. And it is at their own cost, again, remember. And we cried out to the government for us to contain this thing. Other nations and other states, there's some states which are also progressing positively.
All right.
They, first of all, targeted the community. Lock it down, do rapid mass testing, isolate from the community, knowing that your community is done what? Is safe. Having read and understood this virus, and we know its incubation period, if the government was able to run this within 30 days, I'm sure the healthy community, healthy members of the community would be released back to where? To the economy. Right now, the lockdown would be over. Then we focus on the isolated ones, and meanwhile, assuming we've closed all our borders. We look at now the ones in isolation and the ones in ICU, and that would make a lot of sense. And coming right now to do mass testing, I'm not saying it's too late, but it could have prevented a lot.
Okay.
You've heard of cases in like the other Homa Bay case of the day before. And some cases we are hearing in Machakos and all this, they are all avoidable cases. Okay. If we had rapid mass testing and isolating any individuals with potential infection and supporting them, if possible. Of course, there you can study, because I saw South Korea had another research altogether where 91...
and they deploy technology.
Exactly.
Alongside Taiwan and other countries in Asia.
About 91% of those whom they were cured, there were recurrent cases. So all these dynamics, if we consider them and know how to act, then we will know. Just to add to that point, Ayub, again, at the same moment as we're doing mass testing, it called for total lockdown for you to do mass testing.
Yes, and that was my question I was coming to. Will it inform a full lockdown?
Exactly. It's going to inform lockdown because you cannot test people who are moving randomly. Remember the logistics of the previous lockdown where it was announced at 3 and the lockdown was beginning at 7. If you are coming from Kampala, ulale wapi, and transiting to Nairobi, you cannot pass Nairobi. It was illogical. This lockdown should be well thought of. And some of us made concerns. Already there are businesses that are locked, like you can't go to a bar, isn't it?
Yes.
Neither can you even go to a church where some people are employed from, or even a mosque. Some people are earning a living. And we requested the government,
All right.
Having consulted with a number of even stakeholders, especially the landlords, that is a time when we all take national and individual responsibility. Can we have mitigative measures?
All right.
So the government should consider, this is, and you're locking people down, relieve them from pressures that will make them to roam around.
All right.
Like issues of rent, issues of food. Let's have mitigative measures which can sort them within that period. And once you are completed with that, actually citizens will cooperate.
All right.
And if they cooperate, we'll defeat this thing very soon.
Okay, now the issue about the concern, Wakili, if I may come to you, that when we will undertake mass testing finally, because it's the final phase where we definitely are going to be recording new cases of COVID-19 in the country. So far, in your view, is the laid down guidelines by the Minister of Health adhered to by the government in terms of staying at home, social distancing, washing hands, and how effective is that so far in having such a small number, unlike the projected results by the Minister of Health that by end of this month, we are sure by that in about 9 days' time, Kenya will record 10,000 cases?
I thank God that it was just a projection and not a prophecy, because if it was, then we'll be facing very difficult times. But that said, the measures that the government has put in place have worked to limit the spread to some extent. But you see, the way we do life in this country and in most African countries is very different from the way you would see life happening in Western countries. People are constantly on the move, and I could be in Nairobi today and would have traversed basically all counties by the end of the day. So those circumstances are what the government should be looking at. These are exigent circumstances that demand us to have extraordinary measures. And if those extraordinary measures would pinch us to some extent, the government also has a positive obligation to make sure that it is cushioning its citizens from the flow of actions from those measures. So one of the things that we should, I think, copy from Rwanda is to look at food prices, because if you're looking at a lockdown, food is one of the necessities that needs to be looked at. Fixed prices of basic commodities so that citizens are not suffering. Make sure that food distribution and the basic chain of commodities is handled at that level.
Okay.
That will really help us.
Asante sana, Daktari Justus Juma. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. You have brief remarks?
Yes,
briefly, because
my plea would be to fellow Kenyans. Kindly, it is a moment to stand with one another. I know it's difficult. Others are positioned when, because there's certain expectation we would have expected from the government. But there are some which we can take and initiate ourselves. Let's stand with each other. If you have extra food, like us, we've come up with initiative, a Stand with Kenya initiative. We are bringing those who are having, in partnership with supermarkets, just drop wherever you are. We will pick and take it to those who need it. There are a number of areas in coordination with the county commissioner. We are pulling all those resources and we take them down to those who need them. But inspire one another. Let's support one another. It's a historic moment. We can handle this differently from how other countries are handling it. And our generation to come can be able to learn from us how their parents on how we handle this crisis. It's a lesson, it's an opportunity, and which we can use to make history.
All right. Asante sana, Dr. Juma. Wakili Philip, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's have some international update in regard to COVID-19 before we wrap things up here as we see off our panel who have given us an assessment of the situation in the country and abroad. Total confirmed number of COVID-19 cases around the world, 2,478,948. America, the United States of America leads by 787,901. Spain, Italy, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Turkey, all European countries are following, with regards to now China coming at position number 8 or 9, and with only 90,908 cases. When you come to the total confirmed number of deaths around the world, 170,399. Of that, Italy accounts for 24,114. Spain accounts for 20,852. France, 20,265. The United Kingdom, the UK, 16,509. New York City in the United States of America only accounts for 14,604. Now, the total tests conducted in the United States of America, 4,026,572. Of that, 787,901 have tested positive for COVID-19 in the United States of America. Now, let's take a look at the dashboard. And we have the graphical representation of the cases that continue to grow outside China. In regard to the bar representation, the curves flatten in China, is flattening in some European countries, but exponentially growing in the United States of America. And this is a concern for the World Health Organization. The other concern for the Global World Health Organization is, of course, Africa, which it fears will be the next epicenter of the pandemic around the world. So the representation you are seeing on your screens is the transpiration of the graphical representation of COVID-19 in regards to China, outside China, in Europe and in Africa, which of course is a concern for the World Health Organization, with questionable, of course, capacity in terms of response, and indeed the aspect about the accurate results that are being given by the African countries in regard to, of course, what the United Nations World Health Organization says is, of course, censored media in terms of course, limiting what the African people see, hear, read in some countries, of course, where there is no media freedom. And that aspect is, of course, a confusion, creating a concern among the stakeholders at the World Health Organization level. So I need to put up my stuff here. I need to quit here because my colleagues will be coming here for the 1 p.m. update in regard to the other news stories that are happening across the world. And we'll leave it at that. Good afternoon. I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Good afternoon. Asante sana.